Hello, 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 hello. Hmm. Thanks. Eat that.
Oh, Jeff. Awesome. Yeah, I gave everybody everybody is the coming on to I don't know what the sign looks for. Is it recording already? No, you do need to start it's recording. Yeah, that's fine. I can edit it later. So after it gets done, I wanna I'll get in touch with you so they can download it so I can further reach you out. It'll be in your Zoom. It could also be in nonsense on I said that I didn't the right save. Yeah, but I'm also going to record it, at least the voice portion, just in case something else happens. Yeah. You go to I think it's yeah, you go to speaker. This is going to be the microphone is going to be this one. The speaker will always be centered. So go back up to it and go to yeah. Go back over to where it says view. Yeah. And then get speaker. Yeah. And then also you want to enable what you call it subtitles or captions. So that would be actually yeah, put captions on. Show that. Show that. Yeah.
Hi. Hello. How are you? Long time no see. It's great to see you. It's been too damn long.
I know. We'll get it all together now. Now I got the head out of practice dissertation. No. You know Pedro. Pedro's he just finished her dissertation with the last.
It was May. I get the May. I was in here too.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, wow. And you're in California? Yes. Hi, Maggie. Started in 2000. Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
This defense, I was very confident about them. I was like, when it's out of this.
Hello, good morning. Excited. Very excited. Amy.
Yay, what's going on? Hello, everybody online. It's great to see and at least know you're there. I know not all of you are wanting to show your face, but thank you for coming.
Oh, I'll show mine.
I'll be sure not to let the FBI know where you're at.
Hey Keith, it's Irene.
Hey baby, how are you doing?
Hey, good.
Goodly.
Best of luck.
Thank you, my dear. Give it a little carrot and a little herb, my love.
Oh, they're here if you want to see them after.
Okay, that would be cool. Okay. This is not a bad idea to have a copy of my dissertation in front of me. And then, not the worst idea in the world. Thing. For those in the choir at home who can't see, I have my Darth Vader on top of Heidegger and Nietzsche and my Yoda on top of Jaspers. I'm not trying to say anything the same. That's funny. No, that's being captured. Jacob, hey, what's going on?
What's going on? It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I wish I were there in person. My truck broke down this morning, otherwise I'd be there.
Oh, that's okay. We're actually beginning to get the hang of this whole video chat thing. So after 4 years of doing it, I think.
Yeah.
Hello, Paris.
Salutations from the underworld. We all
Thank you,
support
Morgan.
you. You're gonna nail it.
Let's not be so phallic. How about I'm going to bind it together? Well, this is better get a thing in case I have to talk at the board. Yeah, if I was that close, I would do it. But she's lost. I don't think that'd be awesome to be awesome. Yeah, I'm actually going to since I'm in Puerto Rico. Georgie, how you are, sir?
I'm well. How are you, Keith?
I'm doing pretty good considering what's going to happen today.
Say it again.
I said I'm doing pretty good considering what's going to happen today.
Oh, it's going to be fine, I'm sure.
Hey, Tyson.
Keith, did you send me an abstract of the dissertation?
No, I was waiting until after this is all over to write an abstract. I'm doing the clobber method. When it's finished, I'll do the abstract.
Okay,
But I'm pretty sure that what I talked about today will be basically, I'll run it down into what's an abstract, but I have it a little more unpacked, so.
Yeah, I mean, if you're here for this session, you may not need the full abstract.
That's
I mean,
true.
if you're already here, you might as well stay and not,
Exactly.
I think you can make your own synopses.
Okay.
Am I okay here?
Yeah,
That's okay.
sure. Oh.
You want to have the honors of first dialogue with me?
First question?
Yeah, do you have a preference?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
I've been going back over my notification and finding the stuff that I accidentally left out that I sent y'all, so. For some reason, forgot an entire paragraph about Jack's queer art failure, so I got that entered back in case you were wondering.
Just making sure you know everything you
I think
need.
so.
Okay.
Upstairs.
Pete's upstairs. Oh, okay.
Bring it down. Oh, okay, thank you.
We'll wait a few, yeah.
Yeah, we can wait a couple of minutes to get him in here.
What's the best place for Pete to be? Is he?
I would say he's probably right here, he's in a wheelchair, yeah.
Should we been right?
Let's move that down and Chris can help me get situated. And there's him there too. Hey, Tyson, how you doing? We're sick wherever you want. Yeah, there's gas way there. Hey, buddy. Je n'arrive rien. Excuse me. I don't need it. Can't embrace your personality. Pretty. There you go. Yeah, yeah. Awesome. This is my niece, Karen. Hello, darling. You judge. No problem. Hey, John. He's gonna stay here when he gets down here if he wants to sit there.
You prefer, okay, let's just see a few folks with you.
That's fine with
That's
that,
fine.
yeah.
How are you? Good to see you.
Folks, we're just waiting for Pete to come in. Yeah. But we're asking up because their co-eds is actually worried about transfer.
Hello.
Hey, baby. Oh, you already got one. Good, absolutely. Thank you. Just need to stay because there's a few, you know, compromised people that might come. Oh, Plus. Well.
So it's a diva.
I used to live in Puerto Rico, so, yeah, so that's.
Is that where you're from? Okay. Well, welcome. Hey, buddy. I see, Dane's here.
Yeah.
Sarah, what's up?
Sit in this corner if you want to sit next to him on the table or whatever.
Greg in there too. How's the new place?
Oh, it's been great. It's just kind of the first day, it's third wedding. I had to go to the emergency, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because of the rain? Because
They kind of repairs, and it was like excess water. Didn't really make sense, it's just the phone.
Okay.
That
is on you.
No, but I did have that, yeah, deal with it.
Yeah.
But I didn't have, they fixed it up.
Good.
It's been really great.
Nice. Good location or something too.
Yeah, after, so where I supposed to go, the guy, I did money. So I got a better money, $50 more rent, but they wanted the original.
Hey. Good, how are you guys?
I did a break through.
No, don't take down this piece.
No, I know he's gonna be here in this corner, he's in a wheelchair.
Oh, he was walking.
Oh, he was? Oh, okay, well, I guess somebody.
I mean, he may have been walking to a wheelchair.
Oh, he's walking, he's walking to, well, he got a chair, he got his own. Right now, sir. Yeah, you wanna come over?
All the way over?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Just thank
Thank you so much, bro.
you are quite welcome.
Hello, how are you doing today? You wanna sit up here at the table? Irene Turner.
Oh. Not Professor.
I'm people online.
37. What's the little bit? You see that?
Hey, James. There's no, my God, what time is it in Korea? How the hell, dude?
It's Maggie time.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're trying to make it worth your while, I guess.
Oh, there's Jenner. Yeah.
Hey, Joy. They're all getting on.
Okay.
Oh, wow, great.
All right, well, are you ready to begin?
I think so. Let's get this going.
Okay, everyone, I want to welcome you here to Maggie's dissertation defense. Maggie has been a member of our department since the university's founding in 1890. So this is a really momentous occasion. I want to especially thank Dr. Tara Rowe and Dr. Tyson Lewis for serving on the committee. They're going to be main stars of today's performance. I thank everybody for coming out. A special acknowledgement to Dr. Pete Gunter, who's here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pete. And I see our former colleague, George James, is in the audience. So thank you to everybody for coming. My job is pretty simple. I'm just going to lay out our plan for the day. So we have 2 hours max here this morning. After my little spiel, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie, who has 10 or 11 minutes worth of summarizing of the dissertation. you'll also state the title of it.
Yes, at some point I'll.
Yeah, okay, yes. And then I'm gonna turn it over to Professor Rowe for the first question, and I'd like to, if it's okay with you, give you enough time to enter into a dialogue with your questions, concerns, comments. And then Lewis will do the same. And then I was hoping that would evolve into a more open-ended conversation with the committee. We'll kind of see how it goes, but I want to make sure you both have time to say and listen to what you want to do. If there's time permitting, at the end, we'll open it up to everybody in the room and online to ask questions. By probably 11, well, I guess by noon at the latest, we're going to have to break, and I'm going to kick everybody out of the room, including Maggie, except for the committee, and then we'll deliver it on your fate.
It's the best we work with.
Any questions, especially from the committee? Does it sound okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
All right, Maggie, please take us away.
All right, thank you. So bear with me a second. All right. Thank you, Master Adam. Good morning, one and all. Before I launch into a more than likely inadequate overview of the work I'm here to defend, I want to thank all of my great friends and beloved siblings for keeping me buoyed enough to stay on the task of philosophizing as a way of life. So many who joined in person and on Zoom today are the reason for me being in this moment. I lift up my voice today in celebration of this abiding earth beneath the sheltering sky. And I remember those who first walked here long ago, before there were ever any modern colonizers pushing them out, those that brought my own ancestors to dwell here. I also want to thank the department family, the faculty who've given me space to grow for 3 decades, as well as all the graduate and undergraduate students who helped me through our mind walks to go fromward Keith toward Maggie. But I especially want to show gratitude to my siblings that are the administrative specialists and coordinators during my time as a graduate student, Nancy Ellis, Carla Parker, and Amy Cassidy. Having been an admin specialist at the Center for the Study of Interdisciplinarity for 3 years, I want all of you to know that I always see you, I hear you, and I appreciate how each of you contributes to the herding of cats that is keeping academic philosophers within the legal confines of their duties. It's solidarity. And of course, I'm grateful to the committee, Tyson, Tara, and Adam, for putting up with a quasi-mystic thinker who loathes putting anything down in too linear a format, for fear that the forest of existential truth will be hidden behind the trees of utilitarian information. Especially Adam deserves kudos for every time he had to lure this old mountain dog back into the clearing when I was ready to run toward the peaks to hide among the clouds. Likewise, and certainly not least, the buddy friend guy Christopher, who never ever stopped monitoring my willingness to work at this, and who always made sure there was a Star Wars joint ready at hand when I was lost in my own head. So to the apologia. 40 years since I graduated high school and went away to Puerto Rico to study as a pre-novitiate in the Order of St. Augustine. 30 years since I moved to Denton for UNT and entered the Great Books program, the last vestige of a classical education, as my good friend Jim always reminding us. 30 years then since I encountered those considered my great teachers, Edgar Bogle, Ed Coombs, Jim Baird, Hank Eaton, but especially my mentor, Richard Owsley. 20 years since Professor Owsley last co-taught in this very room that same Great Books endeavor, the final iteration before he rejoined the encompassing good, leaving me a journeyman thinker shown new paths to mastery afterward by George James, Pete Gunter, J. Barry Callicott, and Arena Clobber. 10 years since I finally got my bachelor's degree and made the decision to go to graduate school to complete my certification process to teach in the academy. 5 years since I proposed my research topic on how tarot would be used to teach hermeneutics to marginalized folks, especially quilt bag folks. Quilt bag is a substitute for LGBTQIA, meaning queer and questioning, undecided, intersex, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, asexual, gay and or gender non-conforming people, quilt bags. 3 years since diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, if you haven't noticed, and autism spectrum disorder were added to my many other health issues. 2 years since I pivoted the dissertation to a self-deconstruction in order to engage in the core Socratic value, know thyself. 1 year since I said I would be done with this dissertation process by the end of 2023, or I'd walk away from the whole thing. 5 weeks since I sent to my committee members the dissertation, Queer Faith, Weird Hope, Loving Struggle, a reconsideration and application of Karl Jasper's Existenzphilosophie for queer liberation. And here we are today to dialogue and to examine this little work, their requests. I be considered as worthy to enter into the ranks of all those who hold the recognition of PhD, doctor, or teacher of philosophy. As indicated, this dissertation takes up that perennial philosophic task, know thyself. It is grounded in the Existenzphilosophie or existential philosophy of Karl Jaspers for descriptive exercises that explore both my past decisions alongside future possibilities through this reflective present. In my preliminary investigations of failure and weakness, I put some of the insights of queer theory to work, pulling out new notions of queering as well as develop the concept of weirding. If queering leads to self-acceptance, weirding opens up self-knowledge. My work is broken up into 3 sections. Part 1, a new leap. Part 2, the encompassing strikes back. Part 3, the return of the philosopher. There's going to be a lot of Star Wars, folks. So. Part 1, a new leap, includes chapters 1 and 2, an overview of phenomenology as well as Jasper's version of existential philosophy. It is important to note that Karl Jasper's thinkering focuses on existenz, so E-X-I-S-T-E-N-Z, which I often elucidate as self-actualization, rather than, as Martin Heidegger does, zooming in on Dasein, or being there. I also do my best to shine a light on Jasper's notion of the oneness of all being, the source, as the encompassing. Leaping from those basics, the sections lay out ways that I can use the technique of querying in the twisting out of Jasper's thinkering to find ways to better understand self-actualization, existence, as both an intensely personal search and a coexistential call for everyone to engage know thyself. I add to this something I call weirding, more a gesture than a by-the-steps technique, as a way to gather up truths encountered on seeking after my own most being. Truths I can share with others as ciphers of self-becoming. Again, as a call for others to do something like unto it so that we might find a common loving struggle to be our authentic selves together. Along the way from part 1, A New Hope, I pass into part 2, The Encompassing Strikes Back. Here, I attempt querying the hard binaries of Jasper's ultimate situations to offer explorations of what I've come to call the dyads of the human condition. For Jasper's ultimate situations are those structures not arising from the normative limits imposed by culture, but the common boundaries to humankind everywhere, everywhere, despite always appearing in the clothing of the cultural world in which they're expressed. While there are many that could be explored, I focus my work with students in my courses on 5 boundary situations well detailed across Jasper's body of philosophizing. Boundary situations of guilt, struggle, suffering, chance, and death. I actually realized pretty early that kids thought that was pretty negative. So that's another reason I developed the dyads. As I did not want to write a 400-page dissertation, Master Adams suggested I focus on 2 ultimate situations in a way I might do if I were attempting to get it across to my classes. So I have chapter 3 on the dyad of entanglement, which explores the ultimate boundary of guilt innocence, the transgression of circumstances. I consider some Star Wars themes to entangle entanglement, where being guilty and being innocent, rather than opposing concepts, form part of an ambiguous spectrum that needs the other to make sense. just as day and night, up and down, dry and wet, hot and cold only make sense as actualities in connection to the other extreme possibility. Here, I fall into a phenomenological path concerning failure to comprehend how I, so prone to stumbling, have developed from the mythos of George Lucas' Star Wars universe the courage that comes from the possibility of failure. Through an exploration of the Tarot's major arcana card, the Hanged One, I take on in chapter 4 the dyad of engagement, struggle, ease, as the transfixing of circumstances, disclosing elements for where being in struggle and being at ease necessitate each other in their own ambiguous spectrum. Here I begin a phenomenological hermeneutic of being weak to comprehend how I, so debilitated at times in body and or mind, have teased from the symbolism of tarot the prudence of taking on the strength that comes by engaging the possibility of weakness. Finally, with part 3, the return of the philosopher, I review old Socrates as a paradigmatic individual, an unusual and singular expression often acknowledged as a usually too common origin for why we have philosophy departments. For the benefit of those who have not had to labor with my whole work as the dissertation committee has had to do, let me say something about those two out of the ordinary notions I have mentioned. How do I mean this pair, queering and weirding? Pretty queer to have to drink that way. To queer as a verb intends a kind of overturning, like queering established sociocultural arrangements. Accomplished as an intellectual technique, queering reactivates forgotten possibilities in my life, if they were ever known to me in the first place. That is, queering reveals there's more going on in everyday life than customary explications would have us believe. This would be a way of untangling the knotted bindings that obliged me before I even had an opportunity to consider them. It is an epistemological tool that confronts the marginalization of many groups, but for this work, most especially those who identify as LGBTQIA+, or as I noted in preference before, quilt bag folks. Queering then is a methodic approach to the normal life world. Queering is a leap outward, literally coming out. To weird, on the other hand, and weird here for those at home, weird is spelled W-Y-R-D. To weird, on the other hand, deals with how such possibilities allow for a reflective reappraisal of the fabric of reality. This points toward how things may be beyond the appearance, the structures that many demand I avoid at all costs, with pay no attention to the white man behind the curtain. Weirding happens between subjectivity, a leap inward to possible existence, and existence as self-actualization, a leap upward to transcendence and freedom. In this way, weirding knits the experience of breaking out fromward the threads of freedom as the cipher of transcendence. The term itself recaptures the older Anglo-Germanic spelling appearing in early texts such as Beowulf, which I first encountered in the great books. Weird, the origin of our very common term weird, began life as the proper name of a kind of goddess of destiny, Urd, who was responsible for measuring the thread of a life. In time, it becomes the actual term for providence in each entity's life. The world drops away from the wide practice when the Latin term fate becomes more widely used, but they mean something similar. How then does this Urd, Verd, weird come to mean almost the opposite? Strange, unexpected. I will only hazard that the strangeness comes from discovering a previously unnoticed thread of meaning. If I find a weird thread that leads beyond the customary arrangements, it is uncanny by virtue of being unfamiliar, even if discovered to be a necessary aspect for the everyday world. Quantum mechanics and other scientific theories often get brought up here, e.g. how even one of the hardest crystals, a diamond, is more space than it is matter. I would contend another uncanny but no less important notion involves the spectrum between man and woman. These two as well are appearances with a quasi-infinity between them. For this enterprise, I use the designation weirding as an ontological technique for grasping possibilities of liberation beyond normative expectations. Where querying discloses latent activity within the everyday locations of a community, weirding utterly disrupts any current arrangement to reveal it as a passing manifestation, as the metaphor of flowing water, the current, implies. I believe there are many other concepts and a few neologisms that I do not have time to cover here, and my colleagues will more than likely take me to task for them. But I did want to bring up transistence. I think of my dissertating as the transisting of circumstances. I say transist rather than resist based on the observation that social structures of oppression tend toward becoming more insistent the more they are directly resisted. Refusing to be under the yoke of standards established before my birth and without my consent does not equate to what folks are doing when they resist in public protest. Resisting appears to want to keep in place a good portion of the system that is not particularly bothering someone right now. It is a piecemeal reformation at best that does not concern itself with how changing what affects one group only superficially promises changes for all. Transisting, however, critically situates a person in refusal, standing beyond the ordained pattern that orders the world for the benefit of a very few people and not going back to it just because there's some small accommodation made for me and mine. As Simon Springer notes in his adequately named text, Fuck Neoliberalism, it is precisely in the everyday, the ordinary, the unremarkable, and the mundane that I think the politics of refusal must be located. Only in such transistence as refusal can there be a transformation by rejection of the status quo. A committed existential elucidation not only opens up the possibility for, but encourages the actualization of a transcendence through hope, prefiguring a new kind of community. Thus, my trio, transist, transform, transcend, we might have seen it on the advert for the defense. Have I done enough? Can I say I'm done? I was told a long time ago by a grammar professor at Navarro Junior College to never begin the last portion of a text or a speech with the words, in conclusion. Of course, this just meant finding some other synonyms to indicate to the reader that their long struggle is over. They need no longer feel guilty for wanting the argument to get where it was going. In terms of an existential dissertation laying out considerations of the human condition for the project of Know Thyself, to say that I am concluding something must be ironic in the Socratic sense. I am capping off 3 decades of apprentice learning and journeyman wandering in the craft of philosophizing. I am rounding out an expression of my entanglements and engagements in the self-overcoming of how others see me. A conclusion shuts up, puts things into a secure closet, and not one with enough room for the exercises I have played with in the work. To conclude, to nail it together would be to stop before the prize. And as indicated above, philosophizing never stops, only pauses to reorient wherever it may alight from the leaps of thinkering. Thus, my definition of philosophy, rather than the love of wisdom, is the willingness to be uncertain and the will to question. To the degree that dissertating involves taking established notions as previously followed and breaking them up to offer different, possibly original interpretations, it can follow a linear argument from premise to conclusion. I taught logic, I think that's how it works. That certainly puts it in all together, since the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. Yet, as I have stated again and again, Know Thyself cannot be so simply brought to a final statement. The only final statement for such an endeavor is that performance of my last innate ability, the ability to no longer be able to die. Yet, I have not worked this process of self-liberation to end with a structure that mimics going back into the closet where I hid my own truth for so many years. To bring things to a place where my endeavors break free from formal institutional instruction As I complete my opening to the trial and apologia to follow, I will not conclude but make a gesture to that existence who only can be with me today as memory, though he burns bright in my heart as a Promethean flame. There's a bond that forever links an apprentice to their master. See, I said I always get sentimental when I do this. I wasn't scared about the question. There's a bond that forever links an apprentice to their master. There have been many ways to describe it, a devotion, a debt of duty. In Plato, it is eros with a capital E, not the desire for the physicality, but the attraction to excellence of mind between virtuous souls seeking liberation. The master represents a destiny, the apprentice a hope. The former marks out a way, the latter a willingness to be on the way. But it is only when the apprentice becomes a journeyman that the younger realizes, in the too physical absence of the elder, not what they have gained from the older person, but how they have become transformed into the path forward. My being now here marks an arrival. Whosoever I am awaits the ripening of this day to pluck the fruits of wandering wonderment and partake of this truth, detaching from whatever was yesterday while not snatching after whatever may be tomorrow. This present place is not insufficient, but filled with the bounty of love and support. Right now, right here, if Auntie Mame is correct that life is a banquet and most poor suckers are starving to death, my hunger and my thirst receive authentic sustenance today by partaking of this sweet moment of loving struggle, especially now, after all these years, that I have learned how authentic mastery of self is nothing less than the courage to fail and the prudence of weakness. So, I do it or I do not, but there will be no trying today.
All right, thank you, Maggie. Professor Rule.
Hi, Maggie.
Hey.
Hey. Thank you so much for the privilege of being part of this journey, and for the invitation to engage in loving struggle with you. And so that's in the spirit that I want to offer these questions as part of that loving struggle and ongoing, not so much of a defense of a solid position. So I first want to say that the project is a compelling and fascinating exercise in self-experiment, even in technology of the self, as Foucault emphasizes was the proper work of ancient philosophy, through existentialist methods and the Socratic call, as you end the dissertation with, to know thyself. And yet, I'm left wondering at the limits of existentialism, as presented here for queer liberation. If a key part of the goal of the dissertation, as you outline, is to also share with others and to encourage them in loving struggle as well. So the existentialist method, as you've modeled it here, seems to keep you oriented around identity, self-awareness, and self-reflection. And I'm wondering, is there anything more straight than self-awareness, self-sameness? The return to the supposed solidity of identity.
Right.
In this sense, queer identity emerges as a fundamental contradiction in terms.
Right.
So from an existentialist method and a call to know thyself, can one ever properly lose oneself in ecstasy, as Jose Munoz has emphasized, is so key to queer utopias, or what might be akin to your aims of queer liberation? So that's the question that I'll maybe start with, and then I have. Yeah, and then we'll see where we go.
Okay.
So just again, the question is, in that kind of approach of existentialist methods and the call to know oneself,
Right.
can one also, from that method, ever properly lose oneself in ecstasy?
Yes. Actually, the next chapter, if I decided to do the 400-page one, was actually going to be on the dyad of ecstasy, which is suffering and joy, which is I think necessary, because that's where you actually lose yourself. There's a big important aspect of this is really, in one sense, losing the identity you've been defined by, right? So in the guilt innocence dyad of entanglement that I did as chapter 3, I start off actually by talking about Carlos Castaneda's notion of losing personal history. And a part of that actually is the beginning process of, getting the baggage off of you that would allow you to actually experience the ecstasy of being yourself, in that sense of that which cannot be easily identified, right? So I think that Jasper's existential philosophy is actually very good for this kind of thing, because the whole idea is to get to a place where you realize there is no essential self. Existence cannot be an essential self. It's more like an essential process that's always standing out anew in every situation. So it sort of loses itself. Like the more you become identified, with something, like if I know it might seem like I am, but if I do over-identify with Star Wars, or I over-identify as a philosopher, or I over-identify as these other things, part of that actually comes because it's a way that people recognize me. And that's the trap. I do want to be seen and recognized by people, but I don't want to be caught up in the easy definitions that allow people to know who I am. And then I take that on, and then I confuse the mask or the persona of Maggie for the whatever singularity I am. So actually, I would also think about it with Giorgio Agamben, that whatever you are, whatsoever you are, is the whatever singularity, right? Is that you ever, as you are, what you are, how you are, who you are, when you are, where you are, why you are. And to me, that's always ecstatic. And I think that's the real problem I have, as I said in the thing, as a quasi-mystic. I didn't want to do this because I didn't want to accidentally do what you're talking about, which is the oxymoron of queer identity, or the oxymoron of, here I am, I've done this. To say I'm Maggie Malady as a cipher is a way of saying this isn't as fixed as you would think, as most people would think it is, right? As a cipher, all it is it's a glimpse that, there's some crazy shit happening here. And I'd like for you to see it, but I can't tell you the whole thing, right? I think that he gets into this because he was a psychopathologist and a psychiatrist before he was a philosopher. I know Richard always pointed out how he could see through people very easily when they would meet with him. And that he really was concerned that people not get lost in what we would nowadays call the identity, that's the most common for them, right? So yeah, I think that's there. I think that's something to be more worked out, right? But yeah, is that?
Yeah, it does. And I think the next chapter on ecstasy would be fascinating. And I also wonder, throughout you have this kind of approach to existentialism that kind of maybe leads into phenomenology, or right. And so I wonder if in that next chapter, the phenomenological approach might take precedent, or like kind of be heightened over the existentialism.
Right.
Because I'm thinking of Sarah Ahmed's queer phenomenology. phenomenology, right? And what I think one of the benefits of that is that it doesn't retain those kind of questions on self-awareness, consciousness, self-reflection, and instead kind of opens up to this like a very embodied sense of how my body orients itself in space in relation to the world around it, right? And then there are of course implications for something like selfhood, subjectivity, but it doesn't kind of lead with that. It leads with embodied experience in space and one's orientation to that.
Actually, the next chapter on ecstasy is about the stigmata of St. Francis, and I use a lot of Arnold Davidson's work on that, along with Ahmed, to talk about a phenomenology of embodiment.
Yeah.
Where, in a sense, the stigmata is the taking on of the source in a way where you are fully immanent to the world, yet also open to transcendence.
And I don't see Sarah Ahmed necessarily going there to ecstasy, but do you see connections?
Oh yeah. I mean,
can you talk through that a little bit?
Sure. Her work actually is really good because one of the things that it does, I think, in queer phenomenology is that it actually makes you more aware of the aspects of phenomenology that were always supposed to be about embodiment.
Yeah.
And so the body is central to all of this, right? To be there in a new appreciation of what it means to be embodied consciousness, and to actually utilize the phenomenological techniques in a hermeneutic of corporeal experience. And then how that always is because I also bring in here Jose Ortega-Gasset, in the fact that Ortega-Gasset says that there are two circumstances closer to me than any other circumstance, and that's my mind and my body. And those are circumstances, and they're not circumstances like they're sort of dyadic, they can't be separated. So sort of following that kind of I would call hermeneutic phenomenology into the fullness of being someone who suffers and has joy. So because this would be looking at Jasper's what I call the dyad of ecstasy, but it's the translation of circumstances where mind becomes body. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. And just one final comment.
Sure.
I think that also might provide opportunities to shift from a kind of approach that is if kind of one of the end goals of the dissertation, right, is queer liberation.
Right.
And what currently is oppressing queer folk are perceptions of oneself and social perceptions, but especially legal structures.
Yes.
And economic structures, right? I think that kind of a shift to something like a phenomenological approach or a very embodied approach might then open up some of those opportunities to talk more explicitly about the structures and systems that are that are like very material.
The chapter that would follow after the one on ecstasy would actually be would actually concern the boundary situation of chance and purpose. And that would actually be a place where one would want to look at, in my opinion, you follow from this sort of orientation to the body, and what it brings as our way in the world that would then orient the way that we find ourselves forming by chance into an oppressive situation where there are people trying to say this is what this is supposed to be and you're not that, and those kind of things. And also where chance provides for someone who engages in this kind of work, the ability to find a purpose that can work in contra, it can work revolutionarily against those systems. Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Maggie. I appreciate it.
Sure, no, thank you very much. That's a really great question.
Okay. Well, hi Maggie. I haven't been in a room with you in like 7 years. It's just great to occupy space with you. Really, I just want to talk about Star Wars today, but in trying to keep it professional and near the defense, I'll try to come up with some actual questions.
Okay.
So there's a key sentence on page 70, and I just want to read it because I have 3 questions that come out of this one sentence. And I feel like this one sentence in some ways is a sort of meta sentence on the dissertation as a whole. It's like one of these moments where you pause and you sort of summarize some of the key theses of the text. So this is the bottom of 70. It's a very short paragraph, and then there's a sentence with a bolded and italicized. So despite this, queering as transistence, withstanding by twisting loose, must be anarchic rather than democratic, or better anarchic rather than technocratic. Okay. So I have 3 sort of questions that come out of this. One, it seems like one of the key nemeses in the dissertation is technocracies, or the technocratic nature of higher education, or of the way that we police ourselves, and that queering must stand in opposition to this technocratic regime. And so I'm curious as to why you describe queering as a technique and as a tool. And you say this in multiple places. And I'm wondering what you mean by technique. I mean, these technique and tool are loaded terms when it comes to phenomenology, and there's like a long history of this. And I'm just wondering if for you technique is closer to techne in a sort of ancient Greek meaning of it, or what? How do you differentiate? And then later on in the dissertation, you switch terminology again from technique to tool to game. And so I'm wondering how these 3 things stand in relation to, not opposition to, but I guess, how do they queer the technocratic?
Yeah, thank you. That's I probably one of the weirdest, no pun intended, letters that Owsley and I ever looked at from Edmund Husserl to an American thinker in California, his name I can't remember right now, when he was beginning to pick up doing phenomenology. And Husserl, like several times, is very adamant, phenomenology is not a method, right? Which is weird because, that's kind of all it is. But I think it's because he was trying to get at the idea, what I'm doing here is similar, in the sense that techne or skill or tool can still be used, but it has to be broken away from methodology. And I kind of feel like sometimes what we end up doing is we end up getting into a methodology or a methodologization, idol worship. Right. And so for me, if I say the technocratic, that's the rule by the methodolatrist. That's where techne becomes methodology. And the tool is not used as an extension, as a sort of intersection of self and world, but it's like you become an extension of the tool. And then with the game, playfulness, which is a techne, one of the possibilities of being human, has been reduced into just gamesmanship. So and I'm not saying people shouldn't play games. That's okay. It's just it's the notion that game is this very this very almost, it always has a set rule. There's a winner, there's a loser, not always in every game, but most of them. So that's another aspect of it. So for me, those terms, you're right, are very loaded. And I could probably do a little better to kind of point this out, that I don't want rule by methodology. I don't want the tool to be, I don't want any human being to be an extension of the tool. And I also want our world to be something other than a game, which is also, I think, part of the technocracy. So that would be where I think where I come from on that. For me, techne is the skill, right? Where you're, as Gunter might say, where you're so thoroughly immersed in what you're doing, your playfulness allows you to, just sort of let everything go, and you're just in this here, in this now, and you're a part of something. And again, that's not to say that people can't play a game and do that sort of thing, but I think the rules basedness of the game also is not necessarily the same as playfulness. Playfulness doesn't necessarily have rules other than, don't be a schmuck. Let's get immersed in this. That's about it. That's about it. So I don't know if that really begins to get a little more clarification.
No, I mean, I think that I would just, ask you to sort of clarify those terms. There's actually a really good book called Technique and Magic.
Yeah,
which I think you would love, by Federico, blanking on the last name, but anyways, he argues that there's sort of two world systems, or two reality systems, one based on technique and one based on magic. And he tries to make some interesting distinctions between the two that I think you would actually find really
no, I think I would for the simple reason I actually usually go around reminding everybody that the word magic and the word machine come from the same root.
Yeah.
So, that seems like something I really like. What's his name again?
I cannot remember. I'll email you.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Oh, you found it. You found it. Okay.
Companion, yeah. Okay, so back to that quote. Can I ask another one?
Yeah.
Okay. So in that quote, you also argue that sort of a queer politic, this is the one point in the dissertation where you gesture beyond a kind of pure phenomenological argument or presentation towards a politics. And you mentioned anarchy. And I'm just wondering, how does anarchy sit with this need to discover structures of existence and create dyads that seem to organize our experience into clearly recognizable oppositions? And I'm even thinking of the various diagrams in the back of the book where you struggle to, clearly organize and articulate things into these beautifully symmetrical wholes. And I'm just wondering if in some way that butts up against or lives uneasily with this call for anarchy and also atopos.
Right. I'll get to the diagrams in just a second, because the diagrams are actually simply something that I've always done in order for my mind to not get lost, trying to understand something, so I can talk to other people about it. When it comes to anarchy, I am atopos for most anarchists. I am not like most anarchists. For me, anarchy means literally what it means: no first principle. And what I mean by that is not no first principle. It is when I believe that there is an arche, but that's being, that's to be. After that, everything is drag. It's all ordering it. It's all putting it into some kind of an order. My definition of anarchy actually kind of arises from the notion that I usually share with students pretty early on in my classes. It is necessary that human beings have customs, but there are no customs that are themselves necessary. So the particular customs we develop, right, we get to a point where we confuse those customs with nature, or we confuse those customs with something given to us by God, something, you know, that comes out of being fully formed rather than the fact that we made all this. We put these things together, right? And so for me, the anarchic is a way of actually being inside of a situation and learning how to drill through our biases that our customs are the way of being. And that's one of the reasons I'd say their queering as transistence withstanding by twisting loose must be anarchic rather than democratic. I'm not a totalitarian. I believe that democracy is a great thing. But on the other hand, anarchic in this sense, there's a kind of sense where democratic, the rule of the demos, the rule of the people, the power, you know, the power of the people is itself just a mask we throw on top of an order. And then we also do these things like, you know, democracy is the worst system except for all the other ones or whatever it was that guy said. And so for me, the anarchic is actually this ability for people who live nearby each other to actually see, if they're willing to work together, how their customs can be updated, their customs can be trashed and thrown away, that there's, you know, that we're always on the way reapproaching, reappropriating, restructuring, right? So I think the issue is that anarchy is not the denial of structure, it's the recognition that we bear full responsibility for the structure we make. And it has to oppose itself to the masks of democracy, which hide a lot of inequality, and the masks of technocracy and meritocracy, which also hide a lot of that order. So I don't know if that actually begins to make more sense.
I get it. So just to be clear then, would you say that the dyads, are those for you necessary phenomenological structures of existence, or are they heuristics that you have used to organize your understanding of an existence that is in flux?
I think for Jaspers, they're fully necessary.
Yeah, I think so.
For me, in order to not fall prey to how necessary they sort of appeared to him, I wanted to do the dyads as a play on, you know, on these things that might be more akin to natural structures, right? I mean, I really don't know. I mean, how do we know the full history of the human species that goes back, you know, 190,000 years before anything was ever recorded? But it seems like since we've been doing the recording and interacting with each other, there's always death. There's always chance always gets in the way of stuff. Suffering is common to everybody. I often start out talking about struggle. I think I do in the dissertation too. But with people in my classes, I often start out talking about struggle with you struggle to get out of the womb. You struggle to get that first drop of milk. You struggle to turn over in the crib. You struggle to raise your head. You struggle to sit up. You struggle to pull up. You struggle to stand. You struggle to walk. You struggle to run, and it never stops, right? And then the guilt innocent one, I think the guilt is the one that probably, because guilt has been so weaponized against everybody. The authenticity of guilt, which is the ability simply to recognize what I could have done and didn't, or what I should have done and didn't, or what I did, what I should not have done and I did. So, you know, and that those things also sort of appear commonly across cultures, but I wanted to put them into the dyad because I wanted to remind everyone the boundaries of where things start. So guilt starts at innocence, and innocence starts at guilt, even though I still talk about them as extremes of each other, right? But yeah, I think the dyads for me are I'm playing with how I can rescue rescue the ultimate situations in a sense away from any kind of essentialism. I actually don't think that Jaspers himself is quite that essentialist about it, but I do believe that lots of Jaspersians are, right? And so I didn't want it to, because, and the real issue here is that all of these things will appear as they appear in, as I said a little earlier, in the clothing of the culture that you live in and in the personal experience of yourself. And so, the dyadic notion allows for flow, right? Whereas you can get really focused if you only focus on the positive or the negative. You can get really lost and obsessed with just that one aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is interesting and worth maybe talking about in the dissertation a little bit more. I mean, the way I read this and what I really liked about it is that I felt like you were not giving a queer critique of Jaspers, but rather discovering a kind of queer kernel within him and pulling it out, which is a different kind of hermeneutic process, I think.
That's what I was really wanting to do, because Jaspers is actually always perceived as a Christian existential philosopher, but if that's Christianity, that's what I would rather Christianity be than what it actually shows up as. Because when you actually go in there, you realize this man does not respect a dogma that won't stand up on its own, or a doctrine that won't stand up on its own. And he's one of the very few European philosophers who really spend a lot of time interacting with non-European thought, right? And to a really deep degree, and not just cribbing it like Heidegger did, but actually getting deep into it. I mean, he didn't have anything to do for the 7 years he was forced to live basically in in-house exile from 37 to 44 with his Jewish wife and brother-in-law in Heidelberg. And so he just threw himself into the history of intellectual traditions. And it was actually that which made him realize that we need world philosophy. And by world philosophy, he doesn't mean there needs to be one philosophy for the world. He means that we have to open up all of our thinking to every tradition possible, including the ones that don't write. Right? And so I think that Jaspers is queer from that perspective, of especially in terms of European thinking.
Okay, and then just one last sub question related to that one citation. Star Wars. I have to talk about Star Wars a little bit.
Oh, please.
I thought your reading of Star Wars was so interesting and unexpected. It didn't go where I thought you were going to take it. And I still have some lingering concerns. So for instance, you talk about it sort of anarchic politics, transistence rather than resistance. You give a critique of alliances at one point. And I mean, Star Wars seems to embody all these things. It's technocratic to the extreme. It is about building alliances, the Rebel Alliance after all. It's about actual resistance, not about transistence. And so I don't know. I wonder about how Star Wars fits into this larger framework of yours.
Well, first I'd say Lucas's vision originally, I would disagree with you. It's not about resistance. It's about rebellion. That's not resistance, right? And I think that an actual rebellion is more transistive than it is resistive. The problem being that because there are so many different kinds of people brought into the alliance, and a lot of the people who end up taking things in the next direction after the fall of the empire are just people reinstantiating the republic almost the way that it was before, not learning anything, right? Which is the reason that Leia stops being a senator and becomes a general, and goes off to another part of the galaxy to lead a resistance. But again, I don't like that term. That's a part of to me, it's a part of Abrams' abominations of what actually had some real critiques. If you follow a lot of what Lucas is doing, he's not subtle, which is weird to me than why people can't get the point. The man, I'm never going to say that George Lucas, despite getting into an argument with, I think, Johnny about George Lucas being a great director. I'm never going to tell you that George Lucas is a great director, but he stumbled into, which is, as George James would say, from what I learned from him about the dynamics of faith, he stumbled into symbols that allowed him to talk about the fact that America has become an evil empire. And originally in 1977, this shows you how Americans are sometimes very shallow. They identified themselves with the rebellion, but George Lucas was really thinking of the Viet Cong. And the fact that, we had done all of these things in order to make America safe from communism. And somehow that meant going to an area that had been, under the control of French colonialism, and then picking up where they left off in order to try, to keep the empire, the global empire, moving along and doing what it does. And so I think that when I talk about transistence in those ways in that area there with them, it was because I was trying to figure out, as I say in the thing, how do you go from a rebellion to a new republic to a resistance? And and before that there was the separatists in the Clone Wars, right? So you have the republic is breaking down because of separatists. It breaks down, the empire comes, the empire is now rebelled against by people who had, and a lot of them led the fight against the separatists. So, all of those structures are all in there. And the difference about the characters of the Skywalkers and a couple of the Jedi that are central to all of this is Yoda and Obi-Wan live in the guilt of their failure to recognize what was right in front of them. Luke and Leia are a new approach, right? One is because Leia never fully embraces the status quo ante that her mother and father her adopted mother and father on Alderaan represent, which is why she stands as a light of rebellion, even in the newer movies where they slap resistance on top of it. So I do see that. I do see why it probably didn't go the direction that you might have thought that it would go. But for me, I'm always finding something in it that I realize that while George Lucas isn't himself, he's not Shakespeare, he's not Orson Welles, but he really tapped into some what I would call ciphers or archetypes that allow you to, if you're willing to really kind of stick with it, no matter how sometimes you might be disappointed with the way that it kind of plays out or the way that it's filmed or put forward. There's a lot in there that's transitive, like in the Obi-Wan series that just came out. It's funny to me, right? Who are the people that resisted the new movies? Primarily, they're a bunch of white guys who felt like their childhood dreams had been screwed up. Their childhood understanding had been screwed up. In fact, even friends that I'm very close to that are not like that were very disappointed in the way Luke was portrayed in The Last Jedi. So, he's supposed to be the greatest Jedi here ever lived. Now he's being shown as this person who just got all, failed and ran away and did all of this stuff. when you look at Obi-Wan, there's a parallel there. There's always parallels in all of these things, right? That's the way that Lucas structures his films. And those parallels are such that if you just pay attention to the parallels, you begin to realize there's something being worked out here that we have to learn how to scan over, right? Transcend actually literally means to scan over. It doesn't mean what people think it means a lot of times. It's the ability to sort of scan over what's happening and then to stand a little beyond, that's transistence, so that there can be some sort of transformation. Because when you get lost and sunk down into sort of, instead of immersed, playfully immersed, but submerged into the technocratic structures, right? Or into the structures as they've appeared heretofore, you not only lose yourself, you lose the ability to act. Right? So Obi-Wan in the six-part series that recently came out actually parallels way more how Rian Johnson talked about the Jedi and the Last Jedi, right? And that's because the story is and always will be about redemption that occurs when you take responsibility for what you should have done but didn't do, and what you didn't do but should have done, right? And or did do and shouldn't have done. And so, and I don't know if I'm kind of spinning out now or whatever, going on too long, because I literally could talk about Star Wars for 2 days straight. But when you really kind of go in there and you look at it, what is happening? Is it possible for a person, a group, a society to accept the guilt that they have wrought, to take responsibility for the things they brought? Here we have Anakin Skywalker, who falls to the dark side and becomes Darth Vader. And what most people don't realize is he falls to the dark side out of a sense of justice. And that doesn't make sense to most people, because, oh, well, they're evil. It's like, well, yeah, they're evil because they want to impose complete order on everything out of the sense of justice, right? And we don't realize the notion of him as the chosen one, oh, the great white savior yet again, No. He's the chosen one because he's the product of slavery, as America is the product of slavery. And if we can't do that, if we can't accept that, take responsibility for that, right? There's nothing redeemable about us. So that's, to me, that's one of the reasons. I don't really get into that. I mean, I've had more insight since I finished. But I don't know if that kind of begins to move in the direction.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more? Can I sneak in a question? Would that be all right?
All I've done is talk to you for 5 years.
I know, but I can't resist. So
You can't.
can you talk to us? This is something we have talked about. This line I find so interesting, that all humans have customs, but no customers. Necessarily have customs, but no customers.
Right.
And then going back to Tara's point about this being a project towards queer liberation, so there is some moral political valence to this. How is it that you are not kind of trapped in a moral relativism? Right? In other words, why would if all cultures have, all people have customs, but no customs are necessary, is there a trans-cultural standard by which to judge the goodness or justice of any given culture? It seems like you're assuming one by riding towards queer liberation, that one in which that is realized would be better and one in which it's not.
Right.
Can you talk to us about what is the basis of that claim?
Yeah, so when I say that it's basically to kind of get across the idea that little aphorism I came up with for my students back in 2016 to talk about the fact that, you know, all human societies need customs, right? All people need customs in order so that we don't do things to each other, right? But we have to be careful not to take the customs that we see in a place and say, now that's what it should be for everybody. Is there a background thing that we said? Yes, there is. When I taught ethics last spring, when I was using the ethics of ambiguity by Simone de Beauvoir as the basic text for the ethics course, and the way I teach an ethics course is to get students to help me develop an ethic, to learn how these things come about, right? Instead of we're gonna just go through and look at, oh, here's what Kant said about obligation, and here's what the utilitarian, Mill said about utilitarian, and here's what Aristotle said about virtue. It's like y'all are here now with me inside of a society that's already clusterfuck, pardon my technical language, and let's see how we can make an ethic. And how do we do that? And I start off then by that idea that the customs, that we need the customs, right? The customary, so that people kind of know the basics, but that we got to be really careful to not act like, okay, it's going to be this way forever. So how is it not moral relativism? I think it is moral relativism in a sense, but it's not relativism like, it's not some sort of relativism gone amok. It's just recognizing that the relationships that obtain between individuals and between groups and between societies always come from the situation they're in toward the situation that they're not really in. And they have to try to make sense of what that is, right? So yes, I do finally give them something. I don't think I'd call it a Kantian imperative, but I do finally give them something that I think is the background for all of that. And that is the reason that humans have customs is to humanize. And if you have customs that dehumanize, that's when you know you've run across something that's unworthy of being called a healthy, ethical custom.
What is it to dehumanize?
Well, dehumanize would be to treat any person, this follows Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is actually makes some use of Gauss's notion of ultimate situations, to talk about how we're called as human beings to be human beings. In other words, there's a vocation of humanization that all of us should heed, and that is not going to look exactly always the same, but that when you reach a place where you treat someone that is not like you as though they are not human, or you take away their humanity, you take away their agency, then you really have begun the process that will make the customs not so much a boon to life, but a cancer. And when you and according to Freire, and I think he's totally right, when you dehumanize someone, you dehumanize yourself. It has that effect. It's kind of following Buber and Jaspers and Sartre, and Freire is basically saying, if I choose for dehumanization, I've chosen dehumanization for all humanity, and that includes me. Right? So we want to be really careful. Now, we can look around the room, and I can tell you how many people in here have been dehumanized, and it's everybody. I don't have to go through and say why, because everybody knows where you have been treated as less than human here. And you probably know that there have been times where you've treated other people as less than human, because that's what we learn in a lot of our customary, uncritically reflected customs is we adopt from, Uncle Bobby Joe, some horrible thought about women, or some horrible thought about queer people, or some horrible thought about Black people. And that dehumanization becomes something that grows and keeps coming in us, and it becomes habitual, right? And this is something in this deconstruction that I have to deal with. I tell my students, probably y'all would all say, don't ever say that. But I tell my students, I was born in 1964. I was raised by parents who were racist. I'm racist because that's all there. If I don't actively work on that deconstruction, and I gotta say, having gone through my mom's dementia and her being in memory care, I loathe the day that all of that shit that's built into my mind comes back out because there's no more of my control to keep it away, right? But to go even farther, saying, no, I say, I'm racist, I'm sexist, I'm classist, and I was born into poverty. Because that's where we live, right? I'm homophobic. And until I realized I was non-binary 3 years ago, what the fuck is up with that? I'm homophobic, I'm gay. Right? I'm queer. I'm transphobic. That's something I've only worked through the last 15 years. It's all there. If I don't acknowledge it, then I'll succumb to the game of the system, right? But even if I acknowledge it, I've got to keep at it, right? Like with everything that's going on in the world right now, all over in so many places, especially the Holy Land and all of that, it is so easy. It would be so easy to just start making quick judgments, right? And that's when you stop and you pull back. And it's not so much that I don't know what the situation is, but it's like before I take in any more information at a distance, I have to prepare myself so that I'm not going to be dehumanizing anybody, right? No matter, I don't even want to dehumanize Joe Biden and Greg Abbott, as much fun as it could be, or Donald Trump, because that just adds to the structure. But I do want to be able to criticize when I see them doing dehumanization. But to criticize dehumanization is not the same thing as to dehumanize. So, thank you. Okay.
Tara Tyson.
Can I ask just one more question? So because I think the concept, or is that right? Concept of weirding. Is that a concept? You consider that? Well, that
I consider, a conceptual gesture, a gestural conception. I don't know.
So because I think that is a really promising concept, something that I think is really interesting. I think that it could be further clarified.
Yeah.
I think that I'm seeing that you're making a distinction between that and queer. And this is maybe where some of my first questions of identity came up, because you early on you articulate queer as an identity. So then I wondered if weirding was you kind of pushing back against some of that identity.
Actually, it's from the proposal meeting when I had originally said everybody's queer and you pushed back. And I was like, well, but I think everybody is not this. It is weird. That's what I said to myself. I think everybody is weird after the meeting. And I was like, oh shit, I should just pivot to that. Because I'm always going around telling people weird is just the Anglo-Germanic word for fate. But fate that you learn to make use of, amorphati.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm sorry.
And so you contrasted and there overlaps, but you contrasted to queer.
Yeah.
But then you explained that weirding is on 51 and enveloping entirety, but it's not totalizing. So it has some kind of sense of like a metaphysical, ontological kind of structure. And then you emphasize that it also seems to be like a hermeneutic of reality, description of reality that I can see, 50, you're right.
Yeah.
I can see the weirdness of Earth
Right.
always already there as more than the world systems can fully appropriate. And so I think just that, I think that you're really onto something, but I'm wondering if all of those can be true at the same time.
No, I'm not too sure. I think this is where, you know, for me, weirding is the thing to really keep playing with, but try not to break it. And that's why I even began today. I don't think I said this in the dissertation, talked about it as a gesture, not as a blow by blow, do this, step 1, step 2, step 3, but that it's a kind of way of gesturing toward the fullness of reality that we kind of get in our blind spots on. But I think you're right. I mean, James and Vishla got together with me yesterday over coffee. Well, I drank coffee. I think they had beer because they were talking about the dissertation with me. They needed something stronger. So, but you know, we were, you know, in a loving struggle to understand how to use weird, and I'm like, yeah, that's the issue, is that I don't, on the one hand, I want to be really careful not to turn it into another, you know, something that could suffer from methodology. But on the other hand, I really do need to be able to get it across well enough that people realize it's something useful. But, and I think kind of what came out of our discussion is that it's the way to get to a place where you realize the usefulness of the useless, that the weird points out what no political regime, no corporation, no economic system, no utilitarian structure could ever confuse as profitable or as something they could commodify easily, right? And I'm thinking there of The Phoenix and the Madman by Zhuangzi. From the Zhuangzi, where Confucius meets a madman. He points out to his disciples that the madman is useless because he can't pay taxes, he can't work, he can't be in the military, you know, do anything, he doesn't have a skill. And the madman's like, Phoenix obviously is Confucius. The madman's like, oh, Phoenix, everybody knows how useful it is to be useful. Nobody knows how useful it is to be useless. I don't pay taxes. I don't work. I don't have to do any of this other shit that everybody gets made to do. And that's kind of what I think weirding now, the more that I think about it, is how do I get across that this is a way of embracing the useless that can't be commodified.
Yeah, and so I wonder if it, in like further clarifying, I mean, would it even be helpful to talk about it in relation to, but in contrast to like environmental discourses, intrinsic versus utilitarian values,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Is weirding some kind of like, there is an intrinsic value that can be commodified kind of.
I think what direction I'll go with this is after meeting Brian Burkhart and beginning to read his book on land, indigenizing philosophy and trickster methods, that this weirding is resonant with that, right? Land with a capital L is weird. It's not commodifiable. It's not an object. Right?
Yeah, and I would encourage, I think that's a great idea, because he also has a really great critique of intrinsic versus utilitarian value in there that I think is really important. And so he's emphasizing that we need to shift away from something that has kind of an essence of value, like intrinsic kind of does, versus like something that is only found, or a value that is only found in relation to.
Right.
So yeah.
Thank you. I think, you know, there was a lot that came out of the conference we put on. I was a little hyperactive during the conference, so I was always asking questions, but I got so much out of it as I was, you know, listening, but especially Brian's work, because as I was listening to Brian, I suddenly realized, English is a colonizing language because it's the product of 4 waves of colonization. First, the Celts were colonized by the Romans. Then the Roman England or Britain was colonized by the Anglo-Saxons. Then the Anglo-Saxons were colonized by the Vikings, with one last push of the Normans, who are also Vikings, coming in. So you get like these 4 or 5 waves that totally changed this Germanic language into this amorphous. Well, we'll just take whatever the fuck we want from the buffet of everything, and then we'll use that to create an imperial empire, right? And it's to remember that my ancestors from Ireland and England were once way more like the Navajo and the Lakota, without appropriating the Navajo Lakota stuff, right? But by realizing, and that's to me the reason to know the history of language and etymologies. Yes, it's very easy to fall into the etymological fallacy, but I'm always trying to encourage people to realize that no, it's not that the word has to mean what it originally meant. It's that it always carries with it a weird resonance of the moment when people came up with a metaphor to talk about something that they wanted to get across to each other.
You think, so noting the time, it's 11:26, would it be okay if we open it up to other folks if they want to ask questions? Okay, well, if you're on Zoom, maybe put it, if you have a question in the chat, or if you're in the room, just, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I always learn from you. I can't comment on dissertation since I haven't read it. And all I can do is.
You haven't even talked.
Maybe add some things to what you've been talking.
Okay, that's great.
And many of this stuff is, as Huckleberry says, too many for me.
Yes.
But I always think of literature as putting clothes on all these concepts that
Right.
we talk about. And have you read Lord Jim?
Uh-huh.
Okay, let me remind you about that. No, Zach read it. Not about Joseph Conrad. Lord Jim is begins the story as an officer on a ship. And if using some of your terms, if you talked about identity, he would think of himself as a young man and an officer. That's his job. Right. Ship begins to sink. The crew panic.
Right.
And they jump in a boat and leave it for the passengers to sink or something. Well, the passengers operate the ship and get it into port. Now the crew are revealed as cowards. And that haunts Lord Jim for the rest of his life. His new identity is that I failed. I'm a coward. Right. And there are a number of places where they have to jump into the boat to get away from that ship and sink it. Several other places he jumps also. And he relives that role. And his book never really comes out of that.
Right.
He's no longer a coward, but he has to drive himself with that notion to keep himself going. And at one point you mentioned immersion. From this context, that would be studying something very hard, or I'm going to devote myself to this for some time, or I'm going to do all the stuff that needs to be done right out about this. When most people think of immersion, they think of water.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, for that matter, in everyday life, water sustains us. It can be a lot of fun. You jump in the pool, you feel real good and everything. If you fall off your boat that you're trying to sail around the world in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you're dead.
Right.
And I think the point I want to add is when we immerse ourselves in something, we risk the death of something that we have been before. Right. And the story of Lord Jim is told by several different narrators, one of which is an old German named Stein, who, in discussing this leap that Lord Jim made, right, he says one must be in the destructive element immersed.
Yes.
Verb at the end of the sentence. That is, when you're immersed, you run the risk of losing it all. But also, if you know how to say, I'm in the water, I'm not in the land anymore. Right. I've got to act like a fish. But I don't feel like I swim. I'm okay. So immersion goes along with the same life or death struggle that you've been saying is behind everything. Even studying the topic you study. Well, not only do you risk becoming something else, you can become something else.
Right, right. Now, I think that's really good. And I think another thing to kind of point out there is how, with the issue of Lord Jim or, really a lot of Conrad's work is, how do I figure out what's going on and who I am and what's going on? And I think a part of the notion of immersion, to etymologize immersion, right, would be going into. But what happens a lot of times is what begins as an immersion becomes a submersion, and you don't get out of it, right? It's submerged. And actually, that's something that a number of people who talk about the philosophy of playfulness are like, following Gadamer's notion that the person becomes utterly immersed in the play, the thing they come out of the play. But once you become submerged, and this kind of follows Paulo Freire, once you become submerged, you're drowning. And I always actually think of when James Joyce took his daughter to see Carl Jung because she was schizophrenic and she was having all these problems. And Carl Jung said, she's basically lost in the water, the sea of the unconscious. And Joyce said to him, but I do that all the time. And Jung said to him, supposedly, well, yes, but you swim in the sea of the unconscious and she's drowning. So I think that remains very interesting. You brought up Lord Jerry because here, just a few days after I submitted the dissertation, I was talking with Chris's mom about Lord Jim and Conrad and everything. So thank you very much. I was wondering if Pete had any. Did you have something you wanted to ask?
Well, you keep answering all I have.
Oh, okay. So we're all good? All right. Is there anybody else that's got a query?
I do. Am I allowed to like pull up my phone for a note that I took?
Sure.
When I was reading it, I found a lot of like inspiration might not be the right word. But I wanted to ask if you could expand or possibly critique and analysis.
Okay.
And really liked it. I had my phone turned off because I didn't know what the rules were, so we're not wired back on.
Fire it up.
So, and these were just kind of spark notes, and hopefully you can kind of inference where my articulate's messed up. So, philosophizing never stops. I will not conclude my work. You said that. That is a conclusion. Maggie decides to not end with a finale and normal conclusion. They articulate why. Aristotle is in love with wisdom. In Plato's Symposium, Socrates gains topos, or without human state. Wisdom is the pursuit of knowledge and never stops. Queerness is a weirdness that must be abstractly seen as a phenomenon unbound. There's a beauty in knowing that queerness is opposite of conformity. So how does one conform to requirements for an institution when their entire project in philosophy is in the loving struggle to break from conformity and institutions in the first place and to embrace weirdness? Weirdness is the philosophy.
Yeah.
And philosophy never stops nor breaks, it just is. Maggie, to me, is detaching from institutions and embracing their weirdness. And only the act of doing this can one be in harmony. By foregoing a concluding sentence, implying their own and truly living out their philosophy to the very end in this dissertation, to me, it's the dissertation itself. The conclusion rests with the reader, and the reader has been left guided on the nature of this conclusion's existence. Weirdness teaches us how to have meaningful dialogue with anyone through a process or mechanism and tool of identifying and describing abstract phenomena by means of which draw from the uniqueness of self.
Thank you very much. I think this is going to shock people when I say this, maybe, I don't know. I hate the word philosophy. And I hate it because how it was as playful became institutionalized. And I remember being at the Public Philosophy Network meeting in Boulder when I was supposed to be the Socratic in residence, wandering around talking to people about what they were up to. And I was talking with my sibling Rika, who was there, and she told me we didn't have a word for philosophy in Japanese till the Portuguese and Spanish showed up. And we realized how important the word was. So we started using it. And, you know, I had always seen certain aspects of the institutions that we inhabit as, you know, being a part of the imperial colonizing of the world by Europe and during its expansion. And I wanted philosophy to be different, but I think that I was, you know, wrong. So after that, while, you know, I always teach philosophy classes, I started treating the notion as thinkering, because I didn't want to impose the word as a concluding thing on people. Obviously, we still have to use the word as a word in common parlance, but I think we also have to, I believe that we also have to weird it again. And the only way to do that is to stop using it for a while and talk about what I usually talk about it as thinkering. Every society has thinkers. Every society has people who go, you know, group or culture has people who go deep into the mysteries of life, and they tell these things across in all kinds of stories and all kinds of narratives. And so in that regard, I always believed, after talking with Rika, it actually hurt me when she said that. And the more that I really thought about it, the more I was like, the discipline of philosophy tries to keep alive in the academy some small vestige of whatever it was that, you know, has happened in what we might call the high civilizations, right? So Jaspers would usually talk about the axial age, and he would talk about how philosophizing sort of comes to the fore around 800 BCE with the Homeric myths and, you know, the prophets of Israel, and, you know, you see it in India, you see it in China, so you see it in sort of these, and since 800 BCE to Karen Armstrong and David Graeber extended out to 600 CE, since 800 BCE to 600 CE, all of the great ideas, they've all been, and great questions, they've all been sort of struggling asked. Western Europe, which America is most indebted to, is, you know, I don't think that they've ever met a concept that they couldn't use as a tool to colonize. So, you know, philosophy is something we need, but we have to change it to, I think, to thinkering, to trick it again into being a search for meaning and communication with people everywhere, and not just impose it on. And part of that comes with not imposing on people, like Brian pointed out, when he went to Freiburg for a meeting, and everything was centered on fucking books, right? And if you don't write books, and I love books, I love literature, but if you don't do that, then, you know, it's like you don't really have a place at the table. That's just another way to keep people away from communicating, right? I mean, I used to get into arguments with Bob Frodeman about the fact that I thought that, you know, books shouldn't be the measure of success in philosophy. Philosophers should be able to make documentaries, to write poems, to have, you know, how many symposia have you invited people into to just talk? And that doesn't have to be Derrida's logocentrism out of Plato, right? And because the problem is, you know, Derrida trying to help us break free of the logocentrism that sort of comes as the development of the Platonic metaphysics through history. accidentally, certainly not what he wanted, but accidentally helped, with graphocentrism. And that's, so I think that, deconstructing philosophizing back into thinkering and then understanding that all these concepts, like I don't use these concepts when I talk to people at large. And I don't do that because I was once told it's stupid to worry about what people who work at Walmart think and whether they understand these things by a philosopher. And it's stupid. And I was told by another philosopher that we shouldn't concern ourselves with anything other than affecting policies. And I was told by another philosopher, and I'm like, so you don't really you don't care about whether or not people at large are invited into thinkering. You just care about whether or not you can, in your own way, continue the colonizing project. And I don't want to do that. And so that's kind of the issue, right, of getting down to the end. But this is supposed to be a loving struggle, right? That's what co-thinkering is, co-existential thought is. It's a loving struggle. And that means we deny that all struggle is violence, right? That's the biggest, one of the harder things to get over to young people when I'm teaching, is that you hear constantly about struggle. It's always said in terms of violence. Competition is supposed to mean struggling together, but we've turned it into competition, struggling against, to win, to defeat, to dominate, right? So, to me, it was really important getting down to there to say it's not over, because the conversation has to keep going. And, it had to pivot. This was a loving struggle, one-way dialogue with Jaspers and Owsley. And it came out of a constant loving struggle for poor Adam to understand what the fuck I was talking about. And it's mostly due to Adam that any of it makes sense. And now we're here in this loving struggle. And this is co-thinkering. It'll be more with, it'll something else will come out of it. There'll be a book, but that's not the important thing. The book's a remainder, a recording of the possibility. Right? It has to be more, there has to be more to what we do. And it has to be engaging people where they are, right? Like Socrates, like Jesus, like Buddha, like Confucius. They didn't come to people and impose on them concepts. They came to people and they asked them questions, and as they got to thinking with them, they realized how to communicate and talk. And that's why it changes depending on what you're reading in the Dhammapada of Buddhism, or depending on what you're reading in the Gospel, or depending on what you're reading in the Analects, or depending on what way these things look as Plato portrays Socrates. It changed, the communication changes because every time it's somebody else. And, so that's, to me, the reason you bring it all down to something and, now it's all finished, now I'm going to go on to the next project. That used to drive me crazy when I remember someone telling you, you've gotten enough out of this fracking thing, let's stop this and move on to the next problem. No, because you were engaged in a loving struggle of trying to understand something with people who often didn't, they weren't wanting to just be told what to think because it's their life, right? So yeah, that's the reason. That's a long way of answering your things, responding to you. I appreciate you bringing it up, because it should always be, the ending should always be, what is it they say? And hasta la vista, until I see you again, instead of, that's it. That's all, folks. Right? Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
Right.
Maybe in that spirit, I should say hasta la vista.
I think it's probably
To
time.
everyone in this room, except for these
Distinguished professors. I want to say goodbye to everybody online. Thank you very much for showing up and supporting me. I really love y'all. I'll talk to you a little bit later, hopefully online.
Love
Me
you.
too. Great job.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hi, Maggie. That was awesome.
Thank you.
I will definitely.
Thanks for
Congratulations,
having us,
Maggie.
Maggie.
I think that's crazy. It is. Yeah.